Are we about to go through a timeline split? This is one of my favorite topics to discuss, and we're going to break it down in today's show. Hey, welcome to the show. Molly Elmore here. Today, we're going to talk about timelines and a timeline split, sometimes referred to as a timeline shift. I'll explain what I mean by some of these labels because they can kind of sound a little bit esoteric if you're new to the idea, but we are going to break it down for you today. Okay. I've been fascinated with timelines and the concept of timeline theory for quite some time. And if you're new to this, let me just give you my definition because it's not as out there as it sounds. So if you think about your life, there have been for most of us, I'm going to make some assumptions you are like this. We've gone through seasons of life. So there was a season of your life when you were like a toddler. And then there was a season where you were, a teenager. And then you kind of left home in your first season of life as an adult. So each season represents a bunch of qualities and descriptions for you and things going on in your life. So let's just talk about a tip, I'll use myself. So when I was a teenager, I had interests. I had sort of certain style of clothes I like to wear. I had certain foods that I like to eat. I had certain topics that I like to talk about. I had people around me in my life that, my friends, family. If you think about a database, and you could talk about Molly as a 16-year-old, there was all of these descriptors in the database at that time. And again, friends, interests, preferences, what a job that I might have had, where I went to school. And you think about all of those qualities describe my life at that time. And so those qualities impact who I was at a person at that age. And you could describe that season of life as like a timeline, meaning now time is an interesting concept, which I don't really want to get into right now, but there was a certain period of time that my life was described by those qualities. And when you jump timelines, what you do is you're shifting the qualities and therefore the reality that you experience. And often timeline shifts are best seen through a life event. So graduate from high school, you no longer have this life where you go to this place. Now you've moved on, you have new things that you do with your time, new people, probably new places you eat, new conversations you have because there's different kind of people going on. Maybe you have a different job. So think about it. Graduation from high school is a perfect example of a timeline shift because you can measure your life as before and after. And in most cases, certainly in mine, the things that you do and the life you have is different before than it is after. So this idea of timeline jumping and timeline shifting isn't like this crazy futuristic sci-fi thing. We've all experienced major changes in life that are often the result of some kind of event. Now, often those events are known in advance and planned, like if you are graduating from school, or if you get married, or if you have a baby, or you start a new job. Some of these more dramatic or significant shifts I refer to as nodes, or there's timeline markers. And what I mean by that is simply you can easily look back and remember if something happened before or after a timeline shift. So for example, let's say you started a new job and you met all these new people and you could remember okay, when I went on this trip, was that before I started this job or after? So to me, these timeline markers are just significant life events that indicate whether or not something that you're talking about was before or after. Also, we often change as people as a result of these timeline markers. A new job might give you new skills and new experiences and new opportunities that leave you feeling like a different person than you were before those things. Okay. So now, in many cases too, sometimes these timeline shifts are more subtle and you are going through a transition that you don't doesn't feel abrupt, and it's harder to know exactly when that thing changed. If you're learning a new skill, for example, and that skill takes months, if not years to really master, it's kind of hard to remember exactly when was I changed by that because it was a more fluidy transition thing. So We're all shifting timelines constantly because we're all changing and evolving. Sometimes those timeline shifts appear abrupt and could be described as like a timeline jump. And sometimes those transitions feel slower. So it's harder to know exactly like when did the timeline jump? And it's sort of more like an evolution. Okay, so that's a little bit of background on this. So the other thing I want to introduce into this conversation is that when we're talking about timeline shifts, there are three levels that I am aware of. There is like all of us as individuals have our own timeline because for the most part, you are not surrounded by the same people throughout your life. You don't have the same interests, you don't have the same preferences. I mean, me as a 5-year-old, certainly interested in different things than I am now, right? So we've all shifted these timelines as individuals. And then we have kind of our collective, our community, the people that you are around really at this time. And you are experiencing a lot of the changes to our global financial system and our crazy political world and sort of what's happening. We are experiencing those with people in our world. You can call those your tribe, your community, your people that are around you. And we often can feel like when things change for people that you're friends with, then they change for you too. So we rub off on each other and we influence each other. So there's this kind of level two, which is like the people in your world that you actually know personally. And then there's the more macro view on this. When you're talking about the collective and how humanity overall has gone through changes. And, you can kind of see generationally, like things that people generally talked about or cared about 20 years ago are different than they are now. So the collective humanity has also been going through a timeline shift. I made some videos on this idea before, but I think it's helpful for me to look at this whole world that we live in as like a video game because it's easier to detach and kind of observe it analytically, which is sometimes tricky when you're in the middle of it. So if you look at this like a video game, a video game could have a macro storyline that all the players in the game are, having to manage or be a part of. And then you have like, it's a game too, where there's like a team element and you and the people in your world are kind of maybe working together on specific assignments, or you've been given divine tasks, or you have a divine role or mission. There's different ways to describe that. And you kind of work with your little group. And then you have in the game an individual component. So if you can go off and do your own thing in the game, we all have free will and free choice, or the ability to make choices. And that affects kind of the individual thing. So when we're talking about timeline shifts, there's these three levels, kind of like a video game where there's the macro shifts going on that we don't have a ton of influence at a personal level. Then there's sort of the community level, which you do have more of a role in changing. And then you have you as the individual, which is absolutely kind of, you should be your primary goal. Because if you get kicked out of the game, which we'll talk about in a second, as an individual, you are not going to be of service to your group, nor will you be of service to the collective. Okay. So just going to recap here. Timelines are descriptors of our lives at that time and what's going on. We can jump timelines. We are always transitioning timelines because we're always changing and evolving, but we often can consciously or unconsciously, I guess, jump timelines because of events that trigger big changes. I mean, March of 2020 was a big timeline shift for the collective because our world as we knew it changed, and things that we considered like rules all of a sudden were different. And so that's a great example, I think, of how the collective had to go through a transition together, and it affected your community in one way, and then it affected you at a personal level, and all of us around the planet were affected differently by these collective changes. Okay, so now we're going to talk about whether or not there's going to be a timeline split. This idea was first sort of put in front of me a while ago, like a year ago, and it sounded kind of esoteric and just conceptual, like theoretical. So it's fun to talk about. It's one thing to sort of imagine these ideas or have these philosophy discussions, but it's another thing when you start to actually witness them play out in the real world. It's a little bit trippy, to be honest. So the timeline split, I'll just explain this macro level. My favorite way to look at this is that there are two trains that are running in parallel, and these represent kind of two worlds, we'll call them. And you can go back and forth between these trains. And the train that you are on is a function of your vibration level. Vibration level, if you want to get into this, go read Levels of Energy by Dodson. I've made some infographics if you want to look on my Twitter account. Every time you emanate some kind of energy, whether that's a thought or an attitude or a belief, there's a vibration level associated with that. So if you are all pissed off and angry, that's a lower vibration, fear-based thing. Generally, people are upset about something because at their root, there is something they are scared of, generally fear of not being good enough, or, it's kind of a derivative of it. So we can go into this whole rabbit hole about how all the low vibrations are derivative of fear in some capacity, but, anger, resentment, jealousy, even competition, there's a whole bunch of these sort of lower vibration things. And then on the opposite scale are the higher vibration energy levels, which is easily described by love, but it's also gratitude, appreciation, optimism, joy, all this sort of very positive, uplifting emotions. Now, there's also a middle ground, but for the purposes of the discussion, we're going to keep it a little bit general. And you have kind of the low vibe, which are people who think that, the world is falling apart, that we're going to be controlled by these sort of dystopian leaders who want to imprison us and, implement feudalism. And then there's sort of the other side, which is the much higher vibration that we're graduating away from this dark world. The corrupt money system is going away, and we're going to live in a more peaceful, prosperous time where we're kind of released from the fiat debt money system. And sometimes people call this New Earth, New Tartaria, the golden timeline. There's a whole bunch of descriptions of this kind of higher thing. So for the purposes of this discussion, we're going to keep it simple in that there's kind of like the low vibe, fear-based viewpoint of the world. And then there's the high vibe, optimism, love-based world, prosperous world. Now, right now, these two trains are running parallel, and there's lots of doors in between them. So you can have a day where you're all uplifted and optimistic, and you can have a day where you are discouraged and frustrated and scared that the world is falling apart. And what that means in this metaphor is that you can go back and forth between these trains because they're running in parallel. The doors are open. They're going exactly the same speed. So when you move from one train to the other, you don't notice that you are switching trains. However, this is where the timeline split idea, what got planted into me, it was more of a warning that if you are not careful, at some point, these trains are going to slowly start to diverge. And the higher vibration timeline train is going to go to that optimistic future world. And the other train is going to go to the lower vibration fear-based world. And if you are not careful, you could end up on a train you don't want to be on and find that it is difficult to hop trains once the distance between these two has gotten so wide. Now, that gets into some other interesting topics, which is our destiny predetermined in advance by our sort of life path, our story? I actually believe that it is. And especially if you've been given or feel like you've been called to have a divine mission of sorts, you might need to be on one of these trains. And what's interesting is that I call it the dark timeline. That's like the Terminator 3, machines control the world. Things kind of are very bleak. That timeline needs people who are willing to fight and help that dark timeline overcome the evil forces in that room. So the dark timeline is going to have a lot of very good people who want to do the right thing, who are justice seekers, who what I like to refer to as the John Connors of the world, who have to fight and kind of overtake that. So my belief and understanding at this time is that, it's still a little crazy to say these things out loud, certainly on a video, is that the dark timeline people, it's going to include everybody who's cynical and pessimistic and think the world is falling apart. You're automatically going to end up on that timeline. However, there are also going to be people who are mad about the situation, mad about the world, mad about all the corruption, mad about the fiat debt system, and they want to fight and see justice and be a part of this battle to overcome that is still a low vibration viewpoint. And they're going to go on that train and be a part of helping that group overcome that darkness. But it's going to be a longer journey for them. But if I know some people who are wonderful, but they have this kind of soldier mindset where they are like there to fight and overcome and take down the dark world, that's the lower train. Okay, because then there's this higher train, which is one where there isn't, like, fighting is no longer a thing. And any sort of disagreement or different viewpoints, there is a much more mature, evolved way to resolve those conflicts. And this higher timeline has a very different viewpoint on money. There's no more scarcity anymore. This could be the post-Nasara world where this idea that you have to like struggle financially just to get ahead, like that's a very old world concept that won't be part of this new world, this new timeline. We're starting to see that like there are people who are already operating like this is life, and they aren't even like aware, understanding that there is this darker timeline as well. And this is how I'm starting to see that these timelines are splitting and that there's this shift happening. There's another metaphor I think that's helpful to understand, like when these worlds split, like, is the planet going to be cut in half, or are you going one place like literally and I going another place? And that's hard to imagine because we're still on this one planet as far as I know. So there isn't going to be like a physical geographic split. Let me explain this with this other metaphor. Imagine you are in a big city like New York, and there is like a skyscraper building. And that skyscraper has certain like longitude and latitude, like geographic coordinates that building is on. So as far as the Earth is concerned, that building is in one place. However, that building has many floors. And at the top level is this gorgeous penthouse that a person lives in, and they live this blessed life, and their view is amazing. And everybody in their world is just kind and wonderful, and they have everything that they could need in terms of resources and money or whatever. They spend their time like doing kind of good deeds to help humanity or their community. And they kind of live this very blessed life. Okay. Then let's go down to the ground floor of this building where there's like a Starbucks, and you have someone who works in Starbucks, and it's very busy and very chaotic. And sometimes they're happy, sometimes they're stressed. Like things just are very erratic and a little bit chaotic at times. It's the same building, but these two people are kind of living in different worlds for all intents and purposes. And then we have let's say there's a sewer system below this building. Again, same geographic coordinates. And there's a homeless person who has maybe had a lot of mental issues and struggles and like depression. And they are living in the sewer system under this building. And down there, there's like rats and a lot of crime. And it's a very scary, unhappy place to live. So you now have these three people who, in this metaphor, are kind of occupying they're the same geographic coordinates, but they don't live the same life. Like their timeline descriptors are very different. How they experience the world and what their viewpoint of the world is very, very different. Now, sometimes though, these people's paths can cross. So the person in the penthouse will go down to Starbucks to get a coffee and interact with that person who lives there. And so you can still kind of experience life with these other people, but that person's going to go back to the penthouse and their worldview is still going to be the penthouse worldview. And even though the person who worked at Starbucks had an interaction with the penthouse person, they're probably going to stay at this default of sort of stressful, busy, chaotic, worker person. And the person in the sewer system might come up to try to, get some money or get some food. And maybe they interact with the person who works at Starbucks. Again, same thing. You can still cross paths with somebody who is on a very different timeline, but we kind of have this resting state, this default state, and the person in the sewer is going to go back down there at the end of the day, and their worldview is still going to be a function of what goes on in their life down there. So when the timeline split happens, I think we're still going to be occupying the same geographic space, but those differences are going to be more pronounced. We can kind of look through this through the lens of the wealth gap. The people who've been very wealthy live a different life than people who are in the, below the poverty line. They still might, cross paths, drive on the same roads at times, maybe even cross paths in certain businesses where one of those people works. But for all intents and purposes, they live in different worlds. And so instead of this simply being a wealth divider, it's going to be a vibrational divider. So if you are someone who is extremely positive in a genuine way, it's not fake, who really just believes that like this world is amazing and that they're blessed and that everyone in the universe is conspiring for them to succeed, the things that you notice in your world are going to be very different than people who are cynical and pessimistic and watch the news and think everything they see on the news is real and that the political system is just a mess and is there to control us all these sort of dark, sort of negative viewpoints of the world. That's really the vibration level differentiator. And when these timelines start to split more, then it's going to be harder and harder to communicate with someone who's on the other train. Since I've been aware of this theory, I have played around with it and I've reached out to people that I haven't talked to in a long time and maybe even in a couple of cases gotten together with them. And you can just tell if you've had this experience yourself that so much time has passed and so many things have changed, meaning our timeline descriptors are now so different that it doesn't really feel like we click anymore, and that the person that I used to be isn't the same as I am now. So like, it almost feels like we're speaking a different language. Now, that's not always the case. I've had some wonderful experiences recently where I've seen some people I haven't seen in a long time, and it kind of felt like no time has passed. And that kind of lets me know that we are close enough vibrationally that we're still able to communicate with each other. The vibration thing, it's fascinating because, you might have people in your world, your friends, let's say you're someone in your family who you've spent a tremendous amount of time with, but you just don't see eye to eye, like on your view of the world. Like your awake level might be so different that when you talk to this other person, it's like you feel like you're not speaking the same language and you can't really understand their viewpoint on something because it just makes so little sense to you because your viewpoint is so different. And this is a vibration level thing. And what's going to be difficult, and I'm certainly experiencing this myself, is that as these trains start to split, people in your life who you've been around, if they are at a different vibration level, you're not going to end up on the same train. And that can be difficult because you're like, I don't want to leave these people behind. I don't want to say goodbye to them. And this is where this idea of like our stories being predetermined comes into play, and whether or not you have a divine mission or divine assignment that is bigger than your own personal desire. Now, what does get interesting, and I don't have the answer to this, but I like to talk about it, is if I'm destined to be on one of these trains, and I know that, but I don't want to get on that train because I maybe have things that I like about the other train, can you override that? And do you still have enough free will to say, screw that, I'm going on the other train? I don't know the answer to that question. I think we're going to find out pretty soon though. For me, like, I don't really want to be on that lower train. I think that it doesn't bring out the best in me because when I get into a scarcity, fearful, cynical place, I'm not nearly the same person and not nearly as productive or inspiring, because I get sucked and pulled into that stuff, that the fear-based stuff as well. So as these timelines split, be aware of what your vibration is. There's a scale, you can look at it. And this doesn't mean that you're always this one way. So you can be a very positive person and have a really crappy day and get kind of pulled down. And that doesn't necessarily mean you have to panic and be like, oh my God, I'm going to end up on the other train. What the vibration level, in my view, represents is sort of what I call your resting state. So when you wake up in the morning, what is your view of yourself and the world around you? If you are waking up and extremely excited that the great times are ahead, then you have a high vibration. If you wake up like, crap, I got to go do some shitty job, do some other thing I don't like, I got to deal with these people I don't like, and the news is upsetting me and the world is falling apart. If, all of these sort of cynical or negative things are what you wake up on, and you're probably going to end up on the lower train. Now, there's this middle group that is fascinating to me, and these are what I call the blue pills, the unawake people who think things are maybe differently than they are, and maybe they still want to trust the government and believe that the money system is fair and that it's just the way it is. And they are kind of in denial about many things that we have all been sort of told and shown. I don't know what happens with that group, to be totally honest, because there is a fear response there. Their cognitive dissonance is preventing them from understanding that we've been lied to about a lot of things. So they're unable to do that. But if you've ever tried to wake someone else up, it's a very frustrating experience because you're like, and I'm a logical person and I'm a researcher, so like, and I can make a case, trust me. So I can like outline, here are all the reasons why this point that I want to make is you should at least be open to exploring it. And I've had this experience multiple times with people I even know very well, where they just, this wall kicks in and they're like, I cannot have this conversation. I'm not going to entertain this idea because it will challenge everything I believe about the world to be true. And so what I've ended up concluding from that is this idea of a predestined sort of pathway, and that I can't forcibly wake someone else up, nor can I get them to switch trains, nor can I get them to change their vibration level unless that is something they either choose or was chosen by their sort of divine pathway. And so you have to kind of at some point surrender and let go and be like, we are all at the base level individual players in this game, and we're all choosing our own path. And there are many people that are in your life for a season who aren't meant to be in it the whole time. And that doesn't mean you failed or bad or that's like a bad, a thing to be mournful of. Because in order for you to sometimes fulfill your highest mission in life, you have to kind of graduate from high school and go on to the next season. And in some cases, that means you have to leave groups of friends, you have to leave certain relationships, you have to leave certain situations that were keeping you at one place in life. And as long as you stay in that place in life, you're never going to be able to kind of graduate and evolve. I don't mean this to sound judgmental, but like I've actually moved recently, but so the town I lived in was a very small rural town, and there weren't a lot of jobs there for people who were kind of smart, ambitious, and wanted a career after they got out of school. So the majority of the sort of the brightest had to leave to find employment in a specific field. And there were people who stayed behind because either their families like owned a business and they kind of took over the family business, or they just didn't really feel called to leave. And you can kind of see when I've had some conversations with this type of person that they're still kind of clinging to the identity they had like in high school and as a young adult. Like they might have been the football star in high school and now they're in their 40s or 50s and still talking about the sort of glory days. And you can see that by clinging to this old identity, they are not really ascending to this more evolved, higher version of themselves because they are stuck to decisions that they made a long time ago and are not able to detach from that identity to evolve into a future one that is probably unimaginable to the high school version of them. So I've had to go through this process myself of really kind of like detaching from a lot of these things that I believed were true about myself, because that identity was part of an old me that I know to serve in my mission that I've been given. I have to detach from all of that stuff. I can learn the lessons from it and develop the empathy that kind of resulted from some of those experiences, but you can't really ascend if you cling to the past, and you can't cling to parts of your identity and to people and to jobs and to, activities or hobbies even that are part of the old you. Now, does this mean you throw away everything in your identity? Not necessarily. There's probably great core qualities in terms of your values that you want to honor and stick to. So if, honesty and integrity and, honor are very important to you, loyalty are very important to you, you don't want to, I wouldn't suggest abandoning those values, but there might be kind of parts of your life. Maybe you had a certain profession or a certain like activity that you did, like you were a runner or something, and knowing that this future version of you might require that you detach from those activities. This is what the timeline split is in my opinion, that in order to serve as the best and highest version of yourself, you have to be willing to look at all of the things about you and say, which of these are part of the old me and which of these are part of this future me that I'm still creating and building. If this message resonates with you, you're probably meant to be on that higher timeline train. If this seems like crazy and you have no idea what I'm talking about and you think I'm, Looney Tune, probably means this message isn't for you. And maybe you're going on a different train and need a different guide, which is totally fine. I guess the reason I wanted to make this was to let you know that if you do resonate with this, that you're not alone, that I've been aware of this and discussed this with other people. And there's quite a big group of us who understand this idea of the timeline splits. I also want you to know that having to make difficult choices in this ascension process is hard. And I have empathy for you to have to do that. I've certainly gone through my share of that myself. It also, there's times where you feel like you're crazy and you're like, this is just insane. Maybe I should just go back to the matrix and be a good little matrix person. That's not the way. And every time I'm tempted by that, I have to be reminded that no, that we are ascending into this beautiful new world. And if you cling to this old system, you're not going to get to go and enjoy it. An analogy, I love metaphors. Another metaphor that, God, this was like a year ago too, that first came up to me when I first really started to understand the idea of Nasara and basically the money that's been stolen from us being returned, was like, we are all been living in this prison. Like literally imagine like a physical structure, prison, and you live in a prison cell. And in prison, there's like this economy where you do things and you get paid in cigarettes or M&Ms or something, some sort of in prison currency. And every, couple days a week, there's Taco Tuesday and like Meatloaf Monday or whatever. And you get used to this schedule and this routine because this is the only world that you've known is living in this prison. And then one day someone tells you, hey, you're going to be released from prison tomorrow. Are you excited? And you're like, I guess. And you get out of this prison and you have no idea what the world, how to do anything because we've lived in this scarcity driven world with this money system for so long. Like we just, you don't even know what you're going to do with yourself when you get out of prison. You're like, I don't need money anymore. I don't have to work. Well, what about Taco Tuesday? What are we going to do on Tuesdays? And you end up being tempted to cling to this familiar system, even though it was not designed for our benefit. And that's what I think a lot of this transition is feels like is there's comfort in the familiar, even if it's not for your best interest. Like in relationships where there's a lot of friction and tension, those can still feel familiar, even though they aren't necessarily for the best version of you. And this idea about going and embracing this great unknown, kind of going through to this future world that we don't really know exactly what it's going to be like. That fear of the unknown can sometimes push people to stay in these kind of matrix prison systems that might be very decadent and lush. You might have a prison cell with really awesome, comfy furniture and a cool television and good prison food. There's ways that the matrix can make us feel pampered and spoiled in the prison system, but don't forget you are still in prison and you are not serving in your highest and best calling in life if you are unwilling to embrace the unknown and the uncertainty. So, all right, this was my explanation of the timeline split. You'll sometimes hear this referred to as the shift or the switch from 3D to 5D. There's a whole bunch of descriptions because this is a very like theoretical, esoteric concept. And one of the things that's hard for us as humans is we want to use words and language to describe these things that are difficult to describe. That's why I think there's many labels. And I like the metaphor way because we understand energetically like the concept of a metaphor without the words having to be perfect every time. So this idea of two trains, like there aren't going to literally be two trains. This is just, again, a metaphor for people who are right now being able to go back and forth between a high vibration energy level and a low vibration one. And right now it's no big deal to kind of switch back and forth. But at some point when this sort of shift happens, you're either going to end up on one train or the other. Now, the thing that I think I just want to remind you, I don't think that the people who are going on that lower timeline are going to be in that dark world forever. I think there's a long battle that is fought there and the good guys win and the dark dystopian Terminator 3 forces don't win in the end, but that's a different life path. The higher timeline, we go more quickly, and some of us feel called to prepare systems for this sort of new world, and how is this going to look, and what do you do there, and how do we operate outside of the prison system? Because it's going to be so unfamiliar for all of us. We aren't going to know how to function as society because it's going to seem so sort of strange. Anyway, if this resonates with you, I'd love to hear in the comments. All right, I'll see you in the next one. Bye.